Hello everyone, I'm Holly Agar, author of the novel Out of Touch, and in today's video, I'm going to give you some tips on assessing whether your manuscript is ready to send off to literary agents. You should feel confident that your manuscript is in the absolute best shape possible before you send it off, because you've worked so hard on your book, and it's often the case that you only get one shot at submitting your book to your dream agent, so you want to make it count. There are some rare occasions where an agent will get back to you and ask for you to revise and resubmit your manuscript. But even then, there's no guarantee that they'll take you on as their client. So you really want to make sure that you give yourself the best chance possible before you submit your book to agents. And I'm going to give you some tips today on how to know whether your manuscript is ready to send off. But how do you know if it's ready? It can be hard to tell. You've been working on the book for so long that you're not sure anymore about how to assess your own work. That's completely normal. All the points I go over in this video on assessing whether your manuscript is ready for submission are actually available as a questionnaire PDF on my website that you can access at hollyagar.com under the heading Publishing Tips. So you can go there and look at what we discuss in this video, and it's in a nice questionnaire format for you. So let's begin with the first question. Is any part of your manuscript a first draft? When writing a novel, it's not uncommon that you go back in the redrafting process when you're feeling particularly inspired and you want to make some changes. Just make sure that you've looked at your changes at least 3 or 4 times across a few sittings before pressing send when you decide to send it off to agents. I found in the beginning with my writing that by typos, the places where my sentences weren't really flowing were in those spots where I made changes to the manuscript, and then I didn't really go back and look over it as many times as I needed to. So it's really an important thing to ask yourself, is any part of your manuscript a first draft, where you've made changes and you've not gone back to look again at a different time at the changes you've made? Another question you should be asking yourself is whether there are any characters in your manuscript that you don't connect with. They don't have to be likable characters, just interesting and essential to the story. Are any of your characters sort of floating about, not really serving a purpose? If so, you should probably just cut them. And be ruthless in this process. It's your novel, and you want to make sure that every person, every character counts, that they're pulling their weight. Next, do any sections of your book bore you? If you're bored, you can bet that the agent you've submitted to is also feeling bored. For my first novel, Out of Touch, I realized that the sections I found boring were lacking in voice. So I went back when I was looking again at those sections and infused voice into them. I'll be making another video soon that has to do with developing the voice in your creative writing, so stay tuned for that. Another question that you should be asking yourself is whether any part of your manuscript is unclear to you. Don't skip over them, these unclear sections, hoping that the agent doesn't notice, that they go unseen. You should go back and find out what the problem is. Maybe you need to unpack an idea, or maybe you need to cut a section entirely. But you should absolutely not just ignore a section that's kind of unclear. The meaning is lost. There's a sentence that really doesn't make much sense on its own. It needs to be looked at again. It needs to be expanded. Take the time and look over any sections that you think are unclear. Another important thing to consider is whether you're giving yourself time away from your manuscript. Approaching your manuscript with fresh eyes is so important, and it makes a massive difference. How can you do that? First of all, go and forget about your manuscript after you've written a draft. Do something completely different for a few days, if not a few weeks. Then when you return to your manuscript, I really recommend reading it in different formats. So you could be reading it on a Kindle, you could print it off, though that's not as friendly to the environment. You can look at it on your iPad. Even just changing the format to a PDF from Word can make a big difference. The more unfamiliar the format is to your eyes, the more clearly, for some reason, your brain can see something you wouldn't have noticed before. It's really worth taking the time to read your manuscript in a different format so you can see again with fresh eyes. Another question you should ask yourself is whether you've read the manuscript out loud to make sure that the ideas and the sentences flow. This is again another way that you can assess your manuscript with fresh eyes, but except it's with fresh ears, because when you read your manuscript out loud, you're accessing the story in a different way, in a slightly different way, right? Through your auditory through your auditory system. So it's really worth reading your manuscript out loud for general flow. Another thing that you should be doing is asking yourself whether anyone outside of your family or close group of friends has read your manuscript. Getting beta readers is very useful because they can give you objective feedback without worrying too much about hurting your feelings. You want the readers that are going to give you feedback to be as objective as possible. And often, oftentimes that won't be your family because they love you and they don't want to hurt your feelings. So seeking out beta readers is really easy to do, and it's really rewarding actually, connecting with other writers, feeling part of a community where you're reading manuscripts that they submit, where you are sending off your manuscript for feedback. It's a very positive exchange. Finally, can you explain your book in 3 paragraphs, in 1 paragraph, in a sentence, in 1 word? You're going to have to be really good at doing this, at being able to explain what your book is about. And if this task is very difficult, then you really need to rethink whether your plot is driving towards something. That doesn't mean that every book has to be plot driven. I write quite character driven novels and short stories, but there still should be something moving the story forward, and you need to be able to express what that is, whether it's a theme, whether it's a quest. You need to be able to do that as a synopsis, so in different paragraphs, in 1 paragraph, in a sentence, and even a key word. I find it really useful to be able to summarize, particularly as you're going to be querying agents and they want you to send them a synopsis. You have to be able to summarize your book when you write them a query letter. I'll be going over how to write a query letter to agents in another video that I'm going to do about finding the right literary agent. Finally, you need to ask yourself, will your manuscript ever be ready? The checklist that I've created can be a helpful guide, but there's also such a thing as being too hard and too critical of yourself, and holding on to the manuscript because you're afraid. But there comes a time when you have to take that leap. When you find that there's nothing more that you can do to improve your manuscript, then it's probably time to send it. As I said, in my next video, I'm going to talk to you about how to find your dream literary agent, so do stay tuned. Thank you for joining me today, and as always, be kind to yourself, especially when you're writing.